to be with you guys today, and that we have 63 people participating in this section on promising practices in shelter diversion and our lessons specifically learned in Detroit. So everyone should be muted, and so just make sure that you are muted. Also, we're going to be recording this session, just so you know. And then as you'll see in the chat, Jessica Vale is tracking CEUs. And so if you need CEUs for this session, please add your name into the chat along with 4 CEUs. And you'll need to do that at the beginning of the session and then also at the end of the session to check in and out. So just a little bit of orientation for today. We're going to ask that you enter your questions in chat throughout. And so as Paige is presenting, which you'll get to learn a little bit about Paige in a moment, as Paige is presenting, at appropriate times, I will ask the questions to her that you guys are asking throughout the chat. And so as things come up for you, if there's terms or words that are used that maybe you don't understand, please enter that into chat and I'll be tracking that and asking that of Paige as we go along. So we're going to be including some scenarios, and so we're hoping that you guys will chat with us and share your ideas with us. And then also in the chat, we're going to be sharing links to a number of different resources throughout as well. And we'll make sure that you get those after as well. And so we're hoping to make this interactive with your questions and then also kind of using scenarios. I think that's it. So if you need CEUs, just make sure that you check in and enter that into the chat. Otherwise, we will begin and I'll kick it off to Paige.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lindsay. So as Lindsay stated, my name is Paige Beasley. I am with CAM in Detroit at Southwest Counseling Solutions. I'm so happy to be here with you guys today, presenting at our virtual Homeless Summit. So just bear with us. I'm super excited, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So today's objectives. Today we are hoping through this session to help you build understanding of diversion for homeless households, to explore strategies to implement diversion through the coordinated entry system, to increase awareness of best practices of client engagement, and to increase the knowledge on key outputs and outcomes to evaluate diversion practices. So just some disclaimers about today. I love disclaimers. Today's session is based solely off one system's experience. So just keeping that in mind. This session may provide a different overview to the approach of diversion than what you may have been previously trained to understand and implement. And this session does not provide all the answers. We are still learning a lot about diversion as we go along. And so just want to be clear about that as well. And finally, we are hoping to provide some great context to share with you on your own journey to implementing diversion. So what is CAM? As I mentioned, I am with CAM here in Detroit. So CAM is Detroit's local coordinated entry system. The name CAM was coined in 2013 as the coordinated assessment model. So CAM connects people who are experiencing homelessness to shelter and housing resources. CAM is not an organization or a program. It is the coordination of the homelessness response system's resources through a streamlined process. All right, so diversion. What is diversion? The National Alliance on Ending Homelessness definition of diversion is a strategy that prevents homelessness for people seeking shelter by helping them identify alternative housing arrangements and, if necessary, connecting them with services and financial assistance to help them return to permanent housing. In Detroit, we have actually created our own definition of diversion that we developed to understand better how we plan to implement this approach. So in Detroit, for Detroit COCs, we define diversion as a household having a safe, habitable place to stay for the night, whether or not shelter is available. So how does diversion work? Well, we at CAM like to think of diversion as an organic problem-solving conversation to discuss what the alternative housing solution could look like. Usually this results in return to natural supports, family or friends, return to previous housing through negotiation efforts, and ultimately can result in short, medium, or long-term housing solutions. So more about diversion. Just some key points that I want to point out, that it is ever evolving. It is an ever evolving problem solving approach. It is not a program. We don't use it as a barrier to shelter, and it has no clear set of parameters, meaning there is flexibility in the way that you can implement it. And I like to say the fact that it's an approach because it's actually the way we go about the conversation, the way we attempt to implement it, that ultimately we're coming from a problem-solving stance. So why we divert here in Detroit? So I'm sure that you all have a number of reasons as why one should, why a system should implement diversion. In Detroit, we have some things that kind of resonate with us in terms of diversion. That's highlighted here. And so for us, diversion can reduce the number of households becoming homeless, stopping generational and trauma impacts for children. It helps with reserving the limited resources for households who are the most in need. It costs less and takes less time to get households successfully housed. It can reduce reduce the demand for the shelter beds and the size of the program wait list. It can also help communities achieve better outcomes and be more competitive when applying for federal funding. And specifically in Detroit, unfortunately, in some cases, we operate from a scarcity model. So we have limited shelter space. And so diversion to us helps us to help households find safe space for the night. We want to make sure that everybody has somewhere safe for the night. And so diversion helps us with that. So more about speaking about how we implement diversion in Detroit. So in Detroit, all shelter referrals go through the coordinated entry. So we were operating access points at this time. We're operating an access phone line. And so all shelter referrals are actually made through the coordinated entry. Diversion was officially administered at the front door of coordinated entry as of November 2017. And so our approach is diversion happens with every household, every individual prior to exploring any shelter options. Also, in some cases, diversion is also attempted by the coordinated entry staff, again, once that household actually enters into shelter. Okay, so speaking more about diversion within the CAM process, it is a critical piece of and as you can see for this visual, it kind of highlights what we define as our CAM process from start to finish. So when a household actually attempts to access services and what's going to happen to get them to the housing. And so for us, diversion is actually part of that initial process for our intake. And then finally, if we're able to be successful in it, it's also a measurement of a positive outcome for housing. So from our visual, there are two routes in our system. And so one is going through shelter to get through stable housing, and the other is going through diversion. So it's a key component of the CAM process. At the CAM access points, we have a daily goal. And our daily goal is everyone who contacts us to access services, we want to ensure that they have a safe space for the night. And so what that means sometimes is that diversion is going to be a go-to when trying to accomplish that goal. So putting things in perspective about the volume that we're seeing at the access point / phone line, I kind of talk more about our transition to the phone line a little later. But in 2019, we captured some data to understand our volume. And so we actually had 13,748 visits, total visits to the CAM access points. And that's about 55 households per day. That is not deduplicated. sorry, that someone was talking, meaning that these households, some households did represent, right? And so that's the amount of volume that we're seeing at the CAM access points within the year 2019. I'm sorry, can everyone push mute? Thank you, I appreciate it, guys. All right, so more current data from April 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2020. CAM, during this time, CAM they did transition to a call center model, sorry. And we captured 13,136 calls. And so you can see the comparison in volume in 1 year compared to 3 months. We captured the same amount of volume at our CAM access point versus our CAM phone system. We do have 12 CAM staff persons that work in capturing and engaging with our consumers as well. So more about the diversion process in Detroit. When we work with our team to kind of understand, our new team to kind of understand on how to implement diversion, we kind of go by this model. Diversion should be framed as an organic conversation of problem solving and a lot of critical thinking. It allows our consumers to be empowered to come up with creative solutions and for the staff to assist and advocate as necessary. The conversation is continuous and should be revisited at every engagement and opportunity in an effort to resolving their housing crisis. Diversion is a light touch approach and should be looked at as strength-based. The consumer's contributions are the core of the engagement. So through implementing diversion, we also found that it was helpful for us to understand the level of needs of diversion. And so we kind of organically came up with a just a little system for understanding like at what need each household was at. And so it pretty much kind of breaks it down in terms of immediate need of where can the household go for the night, short term, where can they go temporarily, and then permanent, long term, where can they go permanently. Sometimes what we think will only be an immediate diversion solution can actually turn into a short-term or long-term solution on its own. An example of that will be a consumer is diverted to a family member house for the night only, but find out that they can actually stay longer. And so they stay in that situation, are more stably housed than what they anticipated. And I like to bring that to the attention of my team often, because it's kind of, you know, we don't know in that moment what the situation can be, just like us. Our situations change daily. So, you know, what was my reality on yesterday may not be the reality to today, and, you know, whether good or bad. And so we just want to keep those things in mind. And so, and vice versa, someone that we thought that we could divert long term, it may not be as long as we thought. And so we just want to approach it from that standpoint. Okay, so some steps for successful diversion. After implementing diversion since 2017 at the CAM access points, we kind of came with our own little system, our own little methods of how we defined true successful diversion to be implemented. And so we came up with 7 steps. And so the 7 steps, the first one would be identify the crisis, right? So to have that conversation with the household, discuss what exactly is their housing crisis, and to kind of just get more information about that, right? And to hear what the consumer's real concerns are. And so the second step will be to actively listen. And that's our role. The third step will be to explore the possibilities. So based off of what we're hearing, kind of just putting things in perspective. So this could potentially be a possibility, that could be a possibility. And then the fourth step for us is to actively listen. The fifth step will be to identify the resources. Consumers, just like us, of course, they have resources. You know, we don't want to think that they're coming from a complete mode of crisis to where they can't do anything for themselves. We understand that we're only here to assist them in identifying what those resources are. And so after the resources are identified, step 6 is our job to actively listen. And then 7 is to assist in the planning, which I believe is extremely big. I like to let my team know, like, our consumers have to consent to this. This is not something that we are drawing up a plan for them to execute. And like, this is the end all be all. Like, this is their lives, and it's up to them to consent to whatever planning is going to go on in terms of diversion. So just some more techniques about diversion engagement. Some things that we find to be helpful when actually in the process of administering diversion or approaching diversion. So request the assistance of another staff person to engage with the consumer, whether a peer or supervisor. I always find this to be truly, truly helpful. Sometimes having a fresh pair of eyes on the situation, having a different way to convey something may have a different solution. And so we want to explore those things at that time. Listen to the consumer story, track their homeless history, and connect the dots by pulling out key information that may help. This could be considered mind mapping. People come to us and are in crisis, right? And so you have to think, and when we're in crisis, are we thinking of everything? Are we exploring everything? What's going to help us organize our thoughts? And so putting things on paper, putting things in perspective, helping them to connect the dots sometimes gives us different results. Implement from a strengths-based approach. We are here to assist the consumer, and they should feel empowered to lead the engagement and consent to the options of shelter. So again, our consumers are, they're people just like us, right? And so we want to remember that they are not incapable of making decisions. They are not without resources. They are, they are very strong people. And so we want to play on that. We want to understand, we want them to understand that as well. And so we're coming from the standpoint of assisting them and allowing them to lead the conversation and lead the engagement. And so advocacy is key. We can assist them in making a cause or simply sit in silence for support. Advocacy will look different from case by case, and it's based on how our consumers choose to allow us to support them. And I think the key here again is just consent. We're not running the show. We're simply just trying to get a better understanding on how we can assist them. And so there have been situations where consumers have asked me to, to contact and to make those calls. And then there have been other consumers who just let me know, like, no, I can handle this. And that's respectfully so. I take the lead of the consumer. The consumer takes the lead, and I kind of just follow from there. Advocacy looks different based off on what our consumer wants it to look like. Alrighty. So just some diversion scenarios. I think Lindsay's going to help us out here.
Yeah. And so for me, Paige, I think it's helpful to think about this in terms of scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Getting an echo. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to read a couple of scenarios for you, and you tell me how your team has handled this or how you also have handled this.
Gotcha.
Am I echoing really bad?
No, you're good.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Okay, so this first scenario, client Ashley, is a single female, and she presents to an access point seeking shelter. She left her brother's house. My slide went away. Paige, can you take over? Sorry. Paige, can you take over? Okay, thank you.
I can take over. Sorry, I was muted and talking. Virtual world. So kind of just putting into, we talked about a lot about diversion and trying to understand how we could explore different things, different techniques within diversion based off of the scenarios that are provided here today. So I'll just read it through and then kind of just give some thoughts on how my team and I would go about looking at this for a potentially successful diversion. So Ashley is a single female who presents to our access point seeking services. She left her brother's home to stay with a friend a month ago. The friend has recently asked Ashley to leave immediately. Ashley does not have income right now, but does receive food assistance. She was provided a job offer to start within the next couple of weeks, but can lose the opportunity if she does not locate stable housing. Unfortunately, Ashley's situation is all too normal within the work that we do. We see a lot of Ashleys, a lot of similar situations. And so the first step, again, for me and my team would be to really explore her homeless history and kind of figuring out what happened. So just really hearing her story first off, hearing her story and actively listening to what had occurred. And so looking at Ashley's situation, Ashley has resources. Ashley may not have identified her place to sleep for the night, but Ashley has food assistance. Ashley also is looking to start a job soon, and so she just needs to get in a stable place in order to make these things to come to fruition. And so what we want to do is we want to bring to her acknowledgement that Ashley, you do have resources and you have contributions. And so what does those contributions mean? And so it looks like you do have a support network. And so how can we explore what a safe space will be with your support networks if you are able to contribute, and kind of just playing on that and kind of understanding more about that. It looks like she did stay with the brother, but she left. Was there something that occurred, something that we need to explore? Is it, a toxic situation, or was it just an agreement? And so we want to hear more about that, and we want Ashley to ultimately make a decision on what that means for her in terms of a safe place for the night. If we can assist Ashley in contacting her brother and seeing if that is a realistic option, and with the understanding that she does have her own resources and she can contribute to the home if necessary. All right, so the second scenario that we looked at was Jason. Jason is a single parent of 3, 2 boys and 1 girl, all under the age of 5 years old. He recently lost his job due to the COVID pandemic, and eventually was evicted out of his home. Jason and his children had spent the last 3 days at his grandmother's apartment because she stays in a senior complex. That would not be a long-term option. Jason has other family members in the area, but has not been on speaking terms due to a previous incident. So for Jason, Jason's in a very, very serious situation. Jason has minor children, all of which who are very young. And so Jason has lost a lot. So Jason is coming in probably at his wit's end at this point. He has, he's probably contacted different services and probably got nowhere. So Jason's probably coming in a little frustrated. And so the first thing is we want to assure Jason that when he leaves here today, that we are going to find a safe space. We don't know what that space looks like right now because we just want to talk more with Jason, but we want to understand what his situation is and kind of explore that a little bit more. Jason's staying with his grandmother. And so we know that that's not a realistic situation. We see this a lot. People are seeing family members or friends, but they're also at risk of losing their housing if they continue to allow them to stay. And so we don't want to create any additional crisis. We want to make sure that we can solve Jason's crisis, assist with the solving Jason's crisis and not putting someone else in jeopardy in the process. So we know grandmother is not necessarily an option. And so we don't even want to play on that because we understand what the severity is for her housing. But Jason did mention he had family support. We want to know more about that, right? We do know what's the incident. We're not on speaking terms. And so we want to understand more about what that family support looked like before when it was positive, and understanding if there is anything that we could potentially do to assist in it being positive. Jason did work, and so Jason has a work history. So, and it sounds like his children are young. He has full custody. So it sounds like there is some level of childcare as well. And so what was that support network with the childcare? Who kept the children? You know, is that still a positive relationship that we can look into? And so we just want to explore our options. For Jason, maybe we are able to successfully divert him. Maybe we are able to reconcile relationships. We've done it before to assist in reconciling relationships. But also, ultimately, if we're not, we just want to make sure that he's aware of his resources. He's aware of his strengths and when he comes to the table, and that he's not a completely broken person in this situation, that he does have options that he could potentially explore if that is the case. All right, so diversion outcomes in Detroit. You heard me talk a lot about what we do in Detroit and how we're doing it. And so what does that mean? What has it what are the outcomes from this, the outputs from this? So April 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2019, we were able to divert a total of 5,918 households. And of the households that actually sought out shelter services to us, that's about 30% of the households. I know it's a weird time frame, so just bear with me. And then January 1st, January 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2020, CAM was able to divert 1,265 households. That's about 24% of the household that did present to us. And I want to kind of just note from January to about late March, CAM was operating as full access points. And so from late March up until this point, we are currently operating via phone virtually. So that too is another little wrench in our in our way that we administer diversion. So more diversion outcomes in Detroit. So back in late 2019, we did in the fall of 2019, we did a very comprehensive report of our diversion data. We have been implementing it for a while. We were seeing some successes. And so we really wanted to understand our data better, really understand what was really happening with the households we were diverting. And you know, what does this mean? So we did a really comprehensive report. And what we did find out is that of the households we diverted, 61% of those households did not return back to the CAM access point. So we assumed that those households were still successfully diverted. Other percentage that did return though, it was about 39% that did return. And so 34% of those households did return the next day, whereas to 30% returned 7 days later, 19% returned 30 days, 16% returned within 6 months, and then it was a 2% that returned within 12 months. And so we did do like a deeper look and wanted to pay closer attention to that group that did return the next day and 7 days. And ultimately, within our process, those groups who did represent, especially very close to the initial visit, we looked very hard at their situation and getting them connected to shelter services or making sure it was a long-term diversion in their situation. What we also found is what we kind of knew, but we really didn't have the data to look at it. Families are ultimately a little easier to divert. At our access points, we roughly were able to divert about 70% of the families who sought out services. So in comparison to single adults who are about roughly about 15%. So we know that we had greater success with diverting families. We don't know definitely as to why. We imagine when it comes to families, there are kids involved. And so, unfortunately, some of the attitudes or some of the assumptions are that individuals are able to take care of their own needs if they're single adults. And so when it's children, people are more inclined to make sure the kids are in safe and stable situations. Also within this report, we looked at some cost-effective information. So the biggest thing that we found is that CAM spent about $23,644 when diverting 181 households. So this number only accounts for the households that were diverted using financial assistance. And so the caveat to that is we diverted a lot more households not using that financial assistance. So this is about an average of $130.63 per household. The COC cost of sheltering these 181 households would have been roughly about $50,000. And this is calculated based on an average shelter stay of 16 days per household with a shelter reimbursement rate of $17 per day. So the type of diversion resources that we are currently using, we're doing Greyhound bus tickets if we are able to confirm a safe and permanent place for the household to go. Food cards, we understand that sometimes people want to help, but the constraints in their own household for financially won't allow it. And so just contributions for food if we can assist. Lyft rides, maybe they're within the local area, the household that you need to get to, so we're able to get that household and their items safely there. Gas card, consumers have their own cars, and so maybe it's just them simply assisting them with that resource to be able to get them somewhere safe. And also security deposits. Households are able to stay sometimes with family or friends for temporary status, temporary tenure, if they're able to eventually move into their own properties. And so just some more information. For every dollar that we spent on a security deposit assistance for diversion, the COC saved 30 cents. And then for every dollar spent on transportation or food for diversion, the COC saved about $2.80. So that kind of goes into the reasons as to why to divert. Ultimately, we are connecting people to housing quickly, but we are also saving more money at the end of the day as well. And so just some other things to note. When doing this, 42% of those who were diverted and did not receive financial assistance did return to our access point. Whereas to 15% of those who were diverted and did receive a resource returned to an access point. So what we do know based off of that data is you can definitely successfully divert somebody without financial assistance. However, based off of our analysis, financial assistance did help in making sure that the household stayed in that stable situation for a longer period and did not return for a need of services. So funding in Detroit. There have been a mixed bag of funding used for diversion over the years as we've been implementing it. Our staff are funded as intake staff. There is not any specific diversion funding for our staff. Diversion, that goes into diversion being an activity that they complete. It's an approach. It's not necessarily a program. Activities have been funded in multiple ways, public and private. One of the things I'm most proud about with CAM is that we received a very small pot of private funding that was short term. And so we were able to utilize that money, pull the data, and kind of build the case to show our community, hey, diversion does work. This is what we can do with it. And we were able to connect and acquire a larger pot of longer term public funding money. Then And just to note, again, there have been points where we continue to do diversion without the attachment of funding as well, and have been successful with doing it. So 2 things to remember about funding: that diversion can be done without funding, and flexible funding offers creative opportunities. I tell my team all the time, let's figure out what the situation is. Let's figure out what is, if we, how can we divert them? Like, what would they need in order for us to divert them? And then we can see if we can acquire it. So, different people have different needs. And so we can be creative in finding a solution for that. It does not have to fit into a certain box.
Hey, Paige, we do have a question, and it's connected back to the data. Just some curiosity around survivors of domestic violence or sexual assault victims that are coming in. And if you have any information about, like, of the people that are entering the system, what percentage would fall within that population?
Got it.
And if there's any sort of, I would add to that question if there's other things to think about when working with that population.
Yeah, so I don't have in like immediate data right now how many people present in that particular case. And so, yes, that is something we definitely want to consider when looking at diversion, because when we have the threat of violence, the threat of danger, we want to make sure that if we're looking at diversion, we're not also putting you back in jeopardy, but also those who could potentially open those doors to you, looking at those situations as well. Like, is that going to be a threat for other people as well? So, diversion in those particular situations, we want to make sure we're careful and considering all those factors as well. And again, ultimately, we can try, and if it's not successful, we can move forward with looking at other options for sheltering to make sure that household is safe no matter what. I will say that there is a presence of individuals who do present in that scenario or in that particular crisis to our access points. And so again, it's the name of the game is let's really make sure that this is a safe space for them that we're attempting to get them to. And if that doesn't work, then we do want to look at what shelter options we can provide.
Paige, we have a couple of more questions that I think relate to kind of the process that you outlined before. The first is how does diversion affect a client's eligibility for a housing program? And so do they keep their homeless status?
Mm-hmm.
You want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So for the COC resources, that household never technically entered into the system. And so the key is for diversion, we're trying to prevent them from actually being homeless. And so the goal is to connect them back to the natural supports if they do, if that's a resource they have. So the ideal is that, housing stability looks different for different people. And so what one's idea of housing stability is of having one's own, that may not necessarily be the best situation for that household. And so if they come in seeking services, and we find that they do have these other options to explore, and they consent to those other options, then we want to prevent them from going into the homeless system. And so that way we can kind of not necessarily just, we can focus on those other individuals who have no options, but we can also prevent them from being homeless. We know with being homeless, there comes a number of other issues. When one's experience homelessness, is the likelihood that they experience it again is higher, right? The different trauma that comes along with that. And so we want to avoid that as much as possible. So it's a long way to answer your question. They technically aren't homeless, right? And so the funding looks a little different for them. If they wanted to, through our programming at CAM, if we can connect them, we can connect them with housing for very short-term assistance. So first month security deposit, that they can actually move into their own property and avoid entering into the homeless system. So that's one of the techniques that we're using to prevent one from actually becoming homeless, but still also have an opportunity to get connected to some assistance in the process. Was there another question, Lindsay?
Yeah, so connecting back to the question around working with survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with agencies that are doing that work in the community and kind of your relationship and partnership with them?
Yeah, so we work really closely with the domestic violence shelter in Detroit. We have a team that does navigation services for them as well, and working on also making sure that all the persons who are in the system are connected connected to our CAM access point for services. And so, and then we connect with the other agencies who are in outer counties to make sure that they are aware of the other options for financial assistance for the diversion funding that we're using for short term as well, because we know that diversion is not necessarily something that has to happen at the front door. We know that it's something that we can implement in the midst of the housing of the homelessness as well, and so we want to look at that as well. So we do have relationships with the domestic violence shelters and providers. They are aware of our services, and so we definitely connect with them to make sure that all our consumers are connected in some shape or form for assistance.
And Paige, I would just add also that you have ensured that your staff have received training around engaging and working with this population as well. And so I think that's been a priority in partnering with those agencies, but also ensuring that your staff are trained appropriately as well.
Absolutely, Lindsay. Yeah. So, to be clear, we look at all special populations and making sure that training is provided to our staff. So we're coming from a trauma-informed place. And we understand that people are in crisis for a number of different reasons. And so we want to make sure that our staff is equipped to be able to assist in those situations. So we participate in SOGI trainings, DV trainings, looking at how to better assist veterans who are in trauma as well. So we just want to come from a standpoint of doing this work of approaching diversion in the most trauma-informed way possible.
Thanks, Paige. And thanks, Melissa and Kara, for your questions. So one more question, Paige, and then we'll shift and move on. Thank you guys for your question. So I think this question is one that I think gets asked a lot. And so I'm excited that someone asked that. So the question is, do you have a script that your staff follow to make sure that everybody is asking the same questions?
Okay, so to answer your question, we do not have a script. What we do is, that's why I really hone in on the organic conversation. So I think what we do is we train our staff to understand that, like, it's literally trying to understand what the situation is and how we can assist. We really try to get away from the script because we found that it becomes more standard and it's not as personal or it's not as effective. It's not effective with the scripts. Someone else coming in with a piece of paper and a pen asking me these questions opposed to really listening. So we get away from scripts. We really try to center it around asking a question. Having a conversation and coming from a perspective of, like, I need to help problem solve. We did, I believe, Lindsay, did you put it in the chat, the Oracle template? So Oracle does have a template that you can look at to kind of offer some suggestions of questioning, of lines of questioning, and that does kind of give you an idea. And so we have taken a couple of those and some other ones to, like, okay, these might be good questions to ask. But yeah, we try to get away from scripts, and we really try to go at it as organically as possible to make sure that we're really coming from a problem solving stance.
Paige, thanks for referencing that thing. I did drop in a couple of, I think, helpful things. One is the org code. There's an org code diversion training that's on YouTube. There's also a blog that then connects to some of the questions. And then I also dropped in a document about another diversion program, and it speaks to key staff qualities that I think is really important. And so I think it speaks to some of what, Paige, you were talking about. So I just wanted to share that as well. So we have a couple more questions, but I want to keep us moving, and we'll definitely come back to those questions. So people, please keep asking them. I'm so excited for people asking. But Paige, I'll let you move on, and then we'll come back to those.
Sure. So diversion during COVID, right? We are in COVID, and COVID is something special, right? So amid the COVID crisis, it became more imperative than ever to implement diversion. But what we also found is that it was kind of difficult, right? So camp transition, prior to COVID, we had 5 in-person access points where they were walk-in centers. People just walked in and were able to discuss their crisis. We had these private rooms set up, and we could just have a conversation, organic conversation with our consumers and in person. And we had time to do it. They were here. We had opportunities to go back and reference support our supervisors and whatnot to be able to kind of get more clarity on how to proceed. And so with the transition, we end up going into we went to a call center model. And so and everything was done virtually. And so what we did find that it became more difficult, but we were still able to get the job done. We had to make some adjustments. So we did know we lost a personal effect, that opportunity to really connect with our consumers one-on-one in their space. We also had to be more creative about advocating. So if a consumer wanted us to call someone, using the phone lines, we had to get a little more creative in the way we went about doing that. And then we had to think through about the potential challenges we were going to have with trying to get the resources to the consumers, knowing that some of our consumers may have had some barriers with technology, right? So a food card, how are we going to get this electronic food card to our consumer who has never used any internet, any email a day in their life? So we had to think through those things. We had to think about how we could be more creative, how we could be more personal, how we could still support our staff in that process as well. So challenges with administering diversion. So I would say that one of the first challenges was changing the mindset of the community, and in the process, truly defining what diversion looks like in Detroit. And so helping people understand that we are not holding shelter back from people. We are really reserving that space for those in need and connecting people back to their natural supports if that is a viable option. Finding the right staff who are committed to our goals of helping our consumers and ongoing diversion training that goes with it. We had to figure out what type of staff were great for this role because everybody could not do this work. So we found that staff who really customer service centered. They were here to serve the clients at the end of the day. They had great communication skills. They were able to listen and then be able to communicate effectively with our consumers. Also, they came from a problem solving standpoint, and critical thinking was a strength of theirs. And so those are the key things that we look at when we look at the staff who are able to flourish within this role. We know that this is hard work, and so we support our staff with making sure that self-care is a must. We offer we make sure that we're accessible for different support and different training opportunities as well. And then finally, I think for us, challenges with administering diversion centered around data, trying to determine what data to use and how to track it to tell the story and kind of get the biggest impact. As I stated before, we had been doing it for a while before we had a real comprehensive report of what it meant. And so from that report, I think we really opened a lot of eyes within our community on, what the contribution was to our system. So lessons learned about operating diversion. I would say diversion is a continuous conversation. It is a day-by-day process, and it's still a success even if the consumer represents. You have to think of it as immediately. With diversion, there has to be staff buy-in and ongoing support of staff training. I'm still supporting staff because it's not about the right way to do things. It's, it's about a different way of thinking about things. And, they schooled me like, oh, what about this? I'm like, oh, you know what? That works. And so it's just, it's an opportunity for us to support each other in this. Through diversion, we may have to be the consumer's advocate and help them find their voice, remembering that they should choose the way that they want us to show up for them, though. Awareness and checking our own biases is imperative. Diversion, it has changed the way the framing of what may have been deemed what stable housing looks like. What stable housing looks like to me may not be what stable housing looks like to my consumer. And so we want to make sure that we're not pushing off any of our own thoughts, any of our own views on our consumers, and respect theirs respectfully. And understanding that your attitude about diversion can impact the outcome. It's all about the approach. If we go in defeated with with negative vibes, that's what we're going to get. We're always optimistic, whether we're referring someone to shelter or whether, we are trying to connect people back to others, alternative housing, that we're optimistic about it. And we know that, yeah, we're going to get you somewhere safe. And so that's the ultimate goal.
Paige, can you give an example of maybe some of the biases that people have brought, and just thinking about what checking our biases looks like?
Absolutely. So one example I could say is like when a consumer is telling their story of what happened, and us immediately coming to a point where like, well, why would you do that? And maybe not saying it, but thinking like, well, maybe that's why you homeless, or maybe that's why you have a crisis. And so just understanding like your interpretation of what their situation is does not matter, nor is it warranted. And we have to understand that, people are entitled to live their lives, and checking our biases pretty much means that we are coming from a standpoint of service and empathy, and whatever transpired, that's not our business. Our only role in this moment is to assist them with moving forward. And so I would just say any implicit bias, anything of that nature, that just needs to be checked at the door. And I'm honestly not even at the door of meeting the consumer, that should be checked in general, but definitely when you walk in through your work doors. So just being prepared to meet the consumer where they are, and and be ready to help. So if I had to select 5 things that I would want you guys to leave here today knowing about diversion, I would say diversion is a win, even for one night. Diversion should be approached as an organic problem-solving conversation. I cannot say that enough. Organic problem-solving conversation that should be attempted with everyone. So we should not pick and choose who we want to use diversion on. We should be applying it on everyone, even if we think that it's really not going to work. We should. And when implementing diversion, we need to be clear about our goal. At the camp access point, it took us a minute to establish our goal, but our goal has to come, like, at the end of the day, we just need to make sure everyone has somewhere safe to stay. And so that's our goal going into this. There are no parameters in diversion. You should always explore options for creative solutions. It's not black and white. I actually cracked this joke when I'm like, it's not black and white, it's gray and everything in between. It really is, because we are really being unconventional. We're just trying different things. We're asking different questions. And so it's not a script. It's not a program. It's not a flow chart. It's simply just, problem solving. How can we address this problem? All our work must come from a trauma-informed and strength-based model. Again, our consumers are leading. We're here to support, and we want to be conscious that they're in crisis, and we need to be able to support them effectively without re-traumatizing them within that process. So I know you guys had some other questions, Lindsay. You want to?
Yeah. Paige, first off, you're getting lots of shout outs of people loving the work that you're doing, and so I can't celebrate that enough. So there's a couple of questions about like training of your staff and like what that looks like if you have a specific training program. Did it come internally on how to problem solve organically? So if you can talk a bit more about like what does training look like for your staff?
Yes, training for staff. So again, this is stuff that we kind of just we implemented it. We kind of like built the bus as we went, and so we implemented it, and then we was like, oh, these things work. This is something, we're onto something here. And so those are the things that we start pulling on. So we started to develop the level of needs, and we started to understand that more. We started to establish those goals, and so training for staff, kind of now it looks a little different than what it did before. But I would say before, it was literally us working with the staff to try to think a little more creative and to kind of hone in on their critical thinking skills, right? Like, did you explore this? Did you explore this option? We also, I actually just told one of the supervisors and said, hey, I think it's time for another diversion training, because it's something that's constant that we have to keep working at, because the need is not going anywhere, and we want to make sure that, again, we're not bringing unnecessary, we're not bringing households into the system unnecessarily. We want to make sure we can prevent homelessness for people if we can. And so we just want to keep working as like one of those skills we want to keep working at. And so yes, training is very unique. It's more hands-on. We like to I like to go in with my staff, and I like to let them lead. And then I may interject every once in a while so they can kind of see it from a different perspective. And we do a lot of not necessarily case counsel in a traditional way, but we have a debrief after the session, right? To kind of just explore other opportunities. So for the next sessions, they can kind of figure out their own footing and their own way that they can go about those situations as well. So I would say a lot of hands-on training, definitely. And you guys will learn things together.
Yeah, Paige, I think the one thing that I've learned from you really well is that it's both like actual like trainings where you're bringing everyone together and you're learning together. But I think one of the things that you do really well is the focus on supervision and that one-on-one, because I think some people learn really well, and being able to take situations and debrief those. And so I think for me with diversion, supervision and support is so important in addition to kind of that traditional training.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So another really great question from Dallas, and not Dallas the person, not Dallas the location. So it's a little bit of another like scenario client example. So what happens when a client approaches an access point and they don't have a necessary viable natural support system? So they don't have family or friends that are willing to house them. How do you navigate supporting them?
So yes, it definitely happens, the family and friend situation. And we kind of look more in terms of if there's not any natural supports, looking at their situation, right? And so trying to see if there are any resources that they have in their own wheelhouse. And ultimately, we may not be able to, but I would say another thing we explore, maybe not the family or friends. We look at all options. The churches, your pastor or whatnot. We like to look at those different options because we know that our faith-based communities come from a service initiative as well. And so if that's something we can look at and explore, what services are you already connected to? We don't want to reinvent the wheel. And, if you already are connected to some other services that could potentially assist us in assisting you, then we want to look at those options as well. So you can get a little creative. You can look at that. Family and friends out of town. I know it may not be immediate. And we've even had situations where like there were family and friends, but we're not on speaking terms. And so I would never forget, it was the young lady who was a twin, and had came to us a couple of times. And so I was able to speak with her and kind of just have a real heart to heart of what the situation was. And her twin were feuding. But her twin didn't know that she didn't have anywhere to go. And that was enough to know that her sister, her twin, was out and about with her children and had nowhere to go. That was enough for her to put whatever riff to the side for them to be able to work out, and for her to have somewhere to stay. So I understand that natural supports, when people are not necessarily connected to natural support, don't necessarily have the natural supports, that could be a little more of a challenge. But I would say let's get a little more creative in thinking broader in terms of their other supports and looking at that. And if and if that doesn't work, then that's okay, because we need to connect you to other shelter. We need to connect you to shelter. So
yeah, I think Paige, the story around the scenario with twins, one of the things that I heard a long time ago that I think is such a really valuable question is asking folks, is there a family member that if they knew that you were experiencing homelessness or that you literally had nowhere to stay, would worry about you or would be concerned? And so I think to me, that was just a question that really resonated. And I think the other thing that you just pointed on is that, like, not everyone can be navigated, but you have to try it with everyone to really know. And just that's not necessarily a failure, and supporting your staff and not thinking that that's a failure.
Absolutely.
So if people have questions, I believe that I have gotten to most of them, I think. I would encourage folks, if you have questions, to please submit them. And Paige, I'm curious if there's any other kind of last minute thoughts or things that's come up for you that you would like to share.
I would just say, diversion was new to me when I came over to camp, and I'm like, what is this thing? And so the way that we look at it as really just trying to find somewhere safe for the night, that really has changed the way I think about the homelessness system. And so I would just say, just definitely try it, because it can be impactful. It can definitely help individuals and in different ways. And so if you have the capacity to do it, then I would say definitely move forward with attempting to bring it into your system.
Thank you, Paige, so much. You're getting lots of shout outs. Also, as we're wrapping up, just make sure that if you are getting CEUs, that you respond in the chat with just that message that you're signing out. Paige, thank you so very much. I think you're absolutely brilliant, and I hope that folks will reach out if you guys have questions.
Yes, my information is listed on the slide. You can definitely reach me via email. I also put my office number in there as well if you need a conversation. Thank you all for coming and joining our session. I appreciate it so much.
Thanks, guys. Make sure you sign out if you need to. Thanks, Paige.
Thank you.